Given some time to hand out the papers. Can I get the YouTube stream started? Great, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the public. I would like to remind you all this meeting is live on the Council's YouTube channel. Before we move into this afternoon's proceedings, there are a few housekeeping matters that I would like to bring to members' attention. One, I'd like to remind members and officers to stand when they are speaking in the chamber. Two, can I also please remind members that any speeches must be limited to 6 minutes and directed to the item or question under discussion. 3, please may I remind members, officers, including the press and public that are in attendance today, that all mobile phones must be placed in silent and no calls should be made or received in the chamber during the meeting. 4, I've noticed we have some members of the public in the chamber today. For information, as this is an extraordinary council meeting, there are no questions from either the members or the public. If you wish to ask a question at council, the next ordinary meeting will be held in September. Now I'll go to the agenda item. As agenda item 3 is reliant on decisions of members on item number 5, I'm changing the order of business so item 3 will be moved later in the agenda, immediately following item 5. Now I'll go on to item 1, which is apologies for absence. I understand we've received apologies from Councillors Sanderson, Bourne, Bridget, Daly, Dickinson, Ferguson, Gallagher, Jackson, Kennedy, Murphy, Plojai, Reid, Anna Watson, Jeff Watson, Daniel Carr. Have I missed anyone? Councillor Morfitt, okay. And
Chair, did you have Councillor Oliver on your list? Sorry,
no, I didn't have Councillor Oliver wasn't on my list, but Councillor Oliver has given these apologies, you're correct. Is there anyone else I've missed? I can't see anyone indicating. Our next agenda item is disclosure of members' interests. Does any member have any interests to declare that they have not already declared to the monitoring officer before this meeting? Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's just to seek clarification, really. After this meeting, I sit on the EAC committee, and I just wanted to double check with the monitoring officer that item 5, I mean, obviously we can't predetermine what the outcome of that item will be. So does that have any bearing on me taking part?
I will defer to the monitoring officer for that advice.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, Councillor Dunn, no it won't, because the proceedings here are to look at a settlement agreement, not to go behind the reasons for it.
Okay, was anyone else indicating? I can't see anyone else indicating. So I will now move to agenda item 4. Council is invited to consider passing a resolution to exclude the press and public and move into part 2 proceedings. A number of councillors have approached me asking me why is the next agenda item being held in private. So I'm going to invite the monitoring officer to provide us with some advice. Monitoring officer.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may address the Chamber, when officers are preparing reports, they look at the Local Government Act, and the presumption is always openness and transparency, that there has to be everything in the public domain unless there's good reason to make it exempt. When the agenda papers were being prepared, it was highly likely that some of the interests were exempt because they related to an individual, which is an exemption under the Act. And you have to weigh that up against whether you should maintain that exemption. Does it actually outweigh the public interest? And in this case, there is an overwhelming desire to hear this item, the next item, in public. The reasons for this is there have been inquiries made whether we should hold the proceedings in open, and that is because following the Section 114, following the Cala review, there is a strong and overwhelming legitimate public interest for members of Northumberland, the residents of Northumberland, to know why is this being proposed, why does it demonstrate best value. Therefore, my advice is that you have the proceedings in open court. However, I do need to say that you do have to balance the needs of the individual. The individual also has rights, but in this case, the individual's rights are not to be protected because of the overwhelming public interest in hearing this report. I've also taken Council's advice on this, and Council's view also is that it is legitimate to have these proceedings in open court, in open chamber. There is one caveat: if you do decide, and members, Chair, do decide to have the proceedings in open session, that you cannot talk about an individual's personal details, an individual's sensitive details. Therefore, there will be parameters, and I ask you not to stray into those parameters. I also say that, as this is in respect to the most senior officer, that you all will know who this person is, that please be respectful in this chamber, and please be mindful that this is an individual. If you, Chair, through you, if this debate does happen in open proceedings, I would like you to respect that and be respectful in your comments. Thank you.
Councillor Towns, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, if we do proceed in open session, there's certain things that might be relevant given the meeting that's following this meeting on the rising of full council with the EAC, which Councillor Dunn has already mentioned, and I'd just like some clarity that there's some relevant consideration being given by that committee to various things. If we're in open session, are we able to refer to those matters? And if so, kind of at what level of detail, please? Thank you.
I'll pass over to the monitoring officer on that one.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Councillor Towns, you're quite right to raise that, as Councillor Dunn did. I will guide the Chair if you stray into matters which I think may predetermine any other course of action, because you will note from the papers the recommendation is to approve a recommendation from the Staffing Appointments Committee that met this morning to approve the settlement agreement. And there are good reasons for that, which we will go into. As I said earlier, this is not about whether there has been any wrongdoing. This is about the terms of the settlement agreement. If the council decide not to accept the settlement agreement, then the course of action is the route through the EAC and other related processes that are open to the council.
Okay. On the advice of the monitoring officer, I'm going to propose that we take item 5 in public and the press and public are not excluded. The reason for this is due to the matter relating to the most senior member of staff and involving a significant cost to the public purse. I believe it to be in the public interest that this matter be dealt with in public, and I am formally proposing that. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hill, you're seconding that. Thank you very much. Is everyone in agreement with that? Agreed. Thank you very much. As we have all agreed to consider the item in open proceedings, I know it's easy to drift into matters, as has been suggested on the floor already, that might stray into personal matters relating to staff or matters that are of a sensitive nature. And if you do, I will turn the mics off in the chamber. Please forgive me if I'm trigger happy with that. I just would rather we strayed on safety rather than, you know, if something's getting a little bit spicy, I might well press that button there. You'll hear that airline noise and that will turn you off if you're speaking. So just be aware of that. I mean no offence if I do it a little bit too much. I just want to make sure we're in the right space for doing things in the right frame of mind. So I understand from the monitoring officer that the papers will no longer be classified as exempt and confidential and will be published on the council's website. All right. I go on to agenda item 5. I understand that last night you were emailed the reports, but that the appendices were missing. I understand these appendices have now been emailed to you and hard copies are available in the chamber. Can I ask all members to check whether they have the following documents? Appendix 1, heads of terms. Appendix 2, first advice of James Gowdy QC from the 17th of June. Appendix 3, advice from James Gowdy QC dated 26th of July. And that's regarding the proposed heads of terms. Appendix 4, advice of Nigel Giffin QC dated 17th of June 2022. Appendix 5, Secretary of State statutory guidance. Yeah. Is everyone still up to date there, am I? Right. Appendix 6, cost estimates provided by Mills and Reeve. Right. Right. I'll give people a second then. Right. Next thing I've got is a suggestion here. I'm going to suggest that we adjourn for 30 minutes to allow the members the opportunity to read these documents, and probably 5 minutes to check you've got them if the appendixes aren't listed on the top, for example. So, with that, do I need a proposal on that? Right, right. Councillor Wearmouth has proposed that. Can I have a seconder to adjourn for 30 minutes? Thank you, Councillor Simpson. I'll see you back here, I'm going to say, at 2:45.
Council that deals with pay and conditions of the most senior officers of the council. That committee did meet earlier today and voted to put this report before full council for their consideration. The report reflects the results of a meeting in York, as you will have read, attended by councillors from the four of the groups within the council, namely the Conservative, Labour, Independent and Liberal Democrat groups. And I'd just like to put on record the thanks to those that went down to York. It was, as I recall, the hottest day of the year, and you were there for many hours and late into the evening. So thank you very much for the members and for the officers and legal team that attended as well. Separately, members and members of the public will note that there was to be a meeting of the Employment Appeals Committee scheduled last week, which was postponed. Or at least opened and then adjourned. The Employment Appeals Committee deals with disciplinary matters pertaining to the most senior officers of the council, just so you understand. The reason for this extraordinary meeting of the council is to consider the report from the SAC. There is no report at this stage from the EAC. The meeting will be held in public session, which is something that I fully support for maximum transparency, and hopefully it will help the public understand the complicated nature of what we're discussing, and it will leave anyone who might want to put a false spin on what goes on in council meetings unable to peddle any corrupted narrative. All papers pertaining to today's discussion will be uploaded, as you've heard, onto the Council's website on the meeting calendar page for public viewing if you're trying to access them. I'm not aware of any redactions that will be made. There is no personal data in those documents that would require that. In terms of the recommendations, I'll address those in terms of in the debate in due course. However, at this point, I intend to pass over to Mr. Greenborough, who's the lawyer who's been assisting the council in dealing with what have been an incredibly challenging set of circumstances. Mr. Greenborough will address the situation the council finds itself in based on his professional judgment and outline the options that have been available to us. He will identify why, in his judgment, the process is on balance the route that represents the best value for the taxpayer. It will be then for you all to discuss, debate, ask questions of us and determine which way you wish to proceed.
Right. Before we go to questions, I need you to propose that report, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I will get to that bit, which is I'm happy to propose the recommendations so that we can have this discussion, and I believe I will be seconded by
Councillor Simpson. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll pass to Mark Greenborough now.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Council. So you have in front of you a significant number of papers, including the two opinions from James Gowdy QC. He's been advising on the disciplinary process and on the scope for settlement, and also a very detailed advice from Nigel Giffin QC, who has been advising the Staff and Appointments Committee in relation to the international allowance and whether that should be recovered, and that is covered within the terms of settlement. What I'm going to do this afternoon, it will take a little bit of time, so please bear with me. I know lawyers have the habit of only using 5 words when one would do. I'll try and limit that as far as I can, but I think it's important that you do get a full overview of the options and the reasons for taking the decisions you have before you this afternoon. Members will know better than me that this has a long history. Each of you will approach this item with your own personal experiences and doubtless views on the twists and turns and the rights and wrongs. To a large degree, you need to set those aside for the purposes of this afternoon. What is certain is that for a large and complex organisation such as the County Council to function effectively, there must be a clear set of policies and priorities which are set by you as elected members, and a collaborative and trusting relationship with a team of officers who are there to advise and to implement those policies. Northumberland County Council has not had that for a significant period of time. That was the finding of Mr. Caller in his review, and a vital recommendation of his was to resolve the employment position of the Chief Executive as quickly as possible. There is a limited number of ways in which that can happen. Firstly, there's the possibility of disciplinary dismissal. Secondly, a capability dismissal. Thirdly, a redundancy or reorganisation. And fourthly, resignation. The first 3 of those are all within the Council's control. The fourth is not. Members, there is no prospect at all of the Chief Executive agreeing to resign. She believes that she has done nothing wrong. So I will take you through each of the 3 that are within your control and look at the options within there. The first I'll deal with is restructure. The Council is shortly to embark on a management restructure, and the simple fact is that it needs to have a Chief Officer and Head of Paid Service, but that does not need to be a Chief Executive. It is possible for there to be another model, for example, a Managing Director. But triggering a redundancy situation would result in less and not more corporate governance, which is the opposite of the recommendations from Mr. Caller. Added to which, the rules of the local government pension scheme are such that a redundancy would automatically entitle the Chief Executive to access her pension without actuarial reduction, and that would result in a substantial cost to the Council of over £330,000 without even touching the redundancy or pay in lieu of notice or any of the other issues which are before you. So that doesn't seem to be a very cost-effective model. Turning next to disciplinary. Before I deal with the details of this case, let me give you a general overview. For very good reasons, senior officers of local authorities, the statutory officers, have protection from arbitrary disciplinary action. This is there to protect them when they have to speak truth to power. All too often, officers responsible for governance of a council, or its finances, or its organisation, find themselves at risk of losing their jobs because they have to rein in overzealous administrations. I see this in my casebook up and down the country. However, it also means that even where there are grounds for legitimate disciplinary investigation, a long and expensive process is brought into view. Add to that the fact that the employment tribunal system is tilted in favour of claimants, of employees, so that where they have legitimate claims to make, they can do so without the risk of excessive costs being awarded against them, as would happen in the courts. Again, this is a public policy decision by Parliament to help even out the disparity that would otherwise exist between an employee of limited means and employers who almost always have much longer pockets. So map onto that our current situation. As Mr. Gowdy has said in his opinion to the Employment Appeals Committee, there is a strong prima facie case identified in the Section 114 report and in the Colour Review for there to be a disciplinary investigation. The EAC has considered that and unanimously resolved to put issues identified in those reports to the Chief Executive and to ask her for a response. She has done so with a very long and detailed rebuttal of those issues. Irrespective of the merits of the case, the volume of issues and explanations will require an investigation and the appointment of an independent investigator. That process will take, in my estimation, a minimum of 4 months, taking account of August, during which time the Chief Executive would remain on your payroll on full pay. At the conclusion of the investigation, a committee of members would need to hear a case. Let's assume that case took a period of days to hear. If at the end of that process a committee concluded that there is a disciplinary offence, their conclusions and the reasons for it would need to be referred to an independent panel for review. That's the independent persons who sit on standards cases, and you have to have a panel of at least 2, and there has to be a time period of at least 20 days between one period and the council meeting for consideration of their report. So in reality, my estimate is that you would be doing extremely well to conclude any process before Christmas. And again, during that time, full pay, you must pay for an investigator and for several external lawyers, one to advise generally, one to advise the committee, and possibly another to advise the independent panel. So a rough estimate would be, say, £150,000 of costs, and between £80,000 and £100,000 worth of salary. And that only gets you to the end of that process. It doesn't end the litigation, it doesn't end the dispute. And that all presupposes that there are legitimate grounds after the investigation. At the conclusion of that long and painful process, you would still have a long way to go. The Chief Executive has already launched 2 sets of proceedings against the Council. I will comment on those in more detail in a moment. So turn next to the capability route. The Chief Executive has been on sick leave for much of this year. Even before the period of continuous sick leave commenced, she had to have adjustments to her working arrangements to take account of her situation. The last advice that the Council received from Occupational Health was that the Chief Executive was incapable of performing her duties for the foreseeable future. Now that does trigger the possibility to dismiss a person by reason of their capability. But in process terms, that would still require a hearing to be convened and the medical situation reviewed. It is certainly possible that an employee could object to the proposal. They might not agree with the medical evidence that was being led. They might want to return to work. It might be necessary to obtain further specialist medical advice. That would all take a number of weeks to conclude, at the end of which, again, it would come to the full Council for decision. If the Council were to take a decision to dismiss an employee for reason of capability, that employee would still be entitled to their notice pay and to their accrued holiday pay in any event. And of course, a contentious dismissal for ill health might well give rise to claims of disability discrimination. Or to couch it in a different way, they may well bring claims saying that the Council had failed in their duty of care towards the employee. In short, there's a strong prospect of further litigation. So none of these options is appealing. None of them offer certainty or closure to this protracted set of issues. So I've mentioned litigation already. I want to say a little bit more about the litigation risks and costs, and I'll also touch on the restitution. As mentioned, the Chief Executive has already launched 2 sets of claims against the Council in the Newcastle Employment Tribunal. Whilst these have not been prosecuted with any great haste, and the regional employment judge has intervened to try to bring the case into a more readily understood narrative, it is very likely that the case it's very unlikely that the case would be struck out without a substantive hearing. Your tribunal lawyers have estimated that the costs of preparing for and presenting that final hearing in 2023 would be over 5 weeks and may cost between £350,000 and £400,000. That seems like a fortune. It is a fortune, but it is the cost of justice. I'm not in a position to evaluate in any detail the prospects of successfully defending the existing claims. It's a complicated case in which the Chief Executive would have to prove that she'd made a qualifying protected disclosure, that she had reasonable belief in it, that she was subsequently treated less favourably, and that the reason for any detriments that she says that she suffered was because she had made disclosures. Doubtless the council would argue that even if there were such disclosures, what followed was for other reasons, but you would need to assert a positive case. That's an unappealing prospect. If the council lost the employment tribunal, the award would be limited to maybe £75,000, because that's the limit that the appeal courts have put on that sort of claim. But if the chief executive had been dismissed by that time and could show that the reason for the dismissal was because she had made protected disclosures, the damages are unlimited. And if pension loss is included, as well as earnings, it could run into many hundreds of thousands of pounds. But even assuming that the council won, the chief executive recovered nothing in damages, the council would still be out of pocket for the costs, which I've already said could be up to £400,000. So let's look at the situation on restitution. The Section 114 report identified that the chief executive had been in receipt of an additional allowance since 2017. That allowance had not been properly authorised. It is not clear why it was paid, what was included in her duties for which it was paid, why it survived the change from her appointment as Deputy Chief Executive to Chief Executive, why it was set at a rate of 40% above her base salary, or why it continued to be paid for so long. Your Chief Financial Officer concluded it was unlawful expenditure. The Staffing and Appointments Committee received detailed advice from Nigel Giffin, which is before you today, and wrote to Mrs. Lally to invite her comments on those issues, why it was paid, why it was at that rate, why it continued, and whether she believed it should be approved retrospectively or recovered from her. We don't know the answer to those questions, but what we do know is that whilst it was not properly authorised, a significant number of senior members in this council knew that an allowance was being paid, and it appeared in your published accounts in one form or another over all of those years. And those accounts were approved by the Audit Committee. If the council was to go to the High Court on an application for an order for restitution, it's not a simple case. Mr. Giffin has given the detail on that. There are defences that the Chief Executive could present, and a separate court hearing would take place. These are, unlike in the Employment Tribunal, the costs in the High Court would follow the event. In other words, the losing party would pay the winning party's costs, or at least a substantial part of it. So you have to add those costs to the value of the claim in dispute. The value of the claim in dispute is £179,000, to which you'd add maybe £120,000 your own costs, and a liability to the others if you were to lose of maybe 70%. So you're looking at, arguing about as much in costs as you are, or putting at risk as much in costs as you are the value of the money in dispute. Now, the prospects of successfully recovering all of the money would certainly be no less than 50-50. The prospects of recovering some of the money are probably rather higher. Now, no commercial organisation would sensibly litigate on those odds. And in the meantime, with all this litigation going on, the council would be massively distracted. The reputation of the whole organisation is likely to suffer, and the ability to retain the best staff would be impeded, and the ability to recruit a new chief officer team would be substantially hampered. Simply put, a disciplinary or capability case followed by litigation is expensive, uncertain, and is likely to act as something of an albatross around the neck of the council for at least the next 18 months. Against this backdrop of unappealing alternatives, your officers, guided by members, have attempted settlement on several occasions. In October 2021, a proposal was made which, if accepted, would have cost the council over £1.1 million. In February 2022, another negotiation took place that would have resulted in a cost of between £625,000 and £650,000. Last week, a cross-party panel guided the negotiations that took place in York and resulted in the heads of terms which are put before you today. It does involve paying notice and holiday and a sum to settle the tribunal claim and a contribution to the Chief Executive's costs. £209,000 is a substantial sum of money, but it provides certainty. It provides an end to paying salary. It provides an end to the significant legal costs which you have already incurred, and it draws a line under all of the issues. Each side will withdraw all of the claims and allegations against the other. It allows the Council to focus on rebuilding its officer team and on delivering its services, on managing its budget, and on doing what each of you were elected to do. In short, it seems the least bad option. Now, in approaching this task, you have to consider the best interests of the Council. That should be your sole concern, not sympathy with the Chief Executive or anger with a particular member, nor the reputation of members or political advantage. You have to weigh and balance the public interest and act in the best interest of the Council and its taxpayers. Now, there's more than one public interest at play here. Undoubtedly, there is a strong public interest in pursuing potential misconduct. If there is any, misconduct, if there is any, being dealt with according to the law. It is contrary to the public interest to reward failure or misconduct. But there is a strong public interest in having a functioning, cohesive and collaborative leadership of the political and managerial parts of this Council. You have clear and unequivocal advice from Mr. Calla to move on. You accepted that advice overwhelmingly. It is for you to judge the balance of interests and to be accountable for your actions. The three limbs of efficiency, efficacy and economy are plainly made out and have been approved by Mr. Gowdy. Your statutory officers, your external auditor and the external QC all believe that you can lawfully conclude this settlement and that it represents best value. Your committee has recommended it to you today unanimously. For my part, I think it is the least bad option and one that you should accept. I will now invite Jan Willis, your Chief Financial Officer, to discuss the best value and financial elements and to report to you the auditor considerations. And afterwards, I'll be very happy to answer any questions through you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I'll pass over to Jan.
Thank you, Chair. After that lengthy explanation from Mr Greenborough, you'll probably be pleased to hear I'm going to be mercifully brief in my comments. I do think it's important that I explain to you what best value means. I'm sure you already know this, but it's a timely reminder that best value is not just about doing things as cheaply as you possibly can. That is the economy element of the best value duty, and it is important, but we also have to apply equal weight to the other two elements of the best value duty, which is efficiency and effectiveness. So in reaching a view on whether the proposed settlement represents best value, you need to weigh all of those considerations, and you also need to weigh the public interest, as Mr Greenborough has just outlined for you. So in this instance, you have a settlement before you, which has a cash value of £209,000. Under the statutory guidance, which has also been circulated to you, there is a non-cash element to the severance payment of £100,000, which represents a write-off of a proportion of the international allowance that has been paid to the Chief Executive since 2017. Now, the write-down value of £100,000 is clearly not the same thing as the economic value to the Council. As Mr Greenborough has explained to you, there would be very substantial costs of litigation in order to recover the full sum, and uncertain prospects of the Council actually being able to secure repayment of the full sum and potentially exposure to the other side's costs if that claim were unsuccessful. So the economic value is clearly substantially below £179,000, which is the amount that has been paid by way of an allowance since 2017. So weighing all of those different factors, the view of officers, and certainly my view as your Chief Financial Officer and Section 151 officer, is that the proposal to recover those elements that of the allowance that we are able to via adjustments to contributions for pension tax and national insurance, it would be in the council's best interest, rather than trying to pursue recovery of the full sum without agreement. So just turning to the other best value considerations, clearly we have been through a detailed explanation from Mr Greenborough about the alternative courses of action which have been considered alongside the proposed settlement. And I think it is the view of all of your officers that there is no prospect of the Chief Executive leaving the organisation at lower cost. So if you are not minded to accept the settlement, which has been recommended to you today, we will have to revert to one of the other courses of action that have been outlined, all of which carry very substantial risk to the financial risk to the council in the form of ongoing and potentially future claims against the council and all the attendant costs and disruption. And that then leads me into the effectiveness part of the best value equation, which is very much about the council being able to function properly and fulfil its wider best value duty to the residents and taxpayers of Northumberland. So, Chair, at that point, I'm going to stop, but I'm sure members will have questions through you.
I'd be keen to take questions in groups of 3, if possible. I might just go to the people who went to York on that delegation, if they got any questions to start with. Liz Simpson?
No, Chair, I haven't.
Thank you. Anne Dale?
No, I haven't.
I thought this might be the case. Isabel Hunter?
Not at the present time, Chair.
Okay, and I shall go then to Georgina Hill in the first instance.
Thank you, Chair.
Questions at this stage?
Just quick, I'll just get questions and then 2 quick questions, if I may. First of all, which would be standard, any one employer who's asked to agree such a settlement would be asked to waive the right to sue the employer, in this case Northumberland County Council. Is there any other complaints tied into that? Is it just the Chief Executive won't be able to sue the Council, or is it relating to other complaints about, for example, individual members? And the second question, is there any obligation to not speak about these matters, any what's sometimes referred to as gagging orders? I didn't see it in the time I had to read it and digest, but I didn't see any. So if you could clarify that as well, that'd be helpful.
Sorry, any more questions? I'll take them in groups. Does anyone... Councillor Towns?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the 40,000 on account of injury or disability. Can we have some clarity on what the injury or disability in question is, please?
But any other questions? That will be... I will just go to Mark for those then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer through you. In response to Councillor Hill, the objective of the settlement is to draw a line under all of the complaints, which would include grievances, whistleblows, conduct complaints, allegations against the officer, any other forms of inquiry which might be dealt with. The work of the Audit Committee in respect of the wider responsibilities for Section 114 and CALA report would continue, but there would be a cordon sanitaire, if you like, thrown around the role of the Chief Executive within that. It is important that there's finality. The prospects of what I call satellite litigation, so not litigation about the employment dispute, but litigation or quasi-litigation around the facts and matters which surround it, could well lead to a whole industry And if the council is going to move on, it needs to draw a line and say there may have been wrongdoing on both parts, there may have been no wrongdoing at all. But if we endlessly peer into the past, we're never going to be able to look to the future. And so, yes, the terms of settlement do include, and it's set out before you, a complete settlement of all the claims that exist between the parties. You asked about the non-disclosure agreement. I don't think that would be in the council's interest to have a non-disclosure agreement. There will be some elements relating to personal sensitive data which would be exempt from that, but it wouldn't be my present intention to include anything like that within the formal terms of agreement. That said, I think the less that is said after today, the better it will be for everybody. I know there's already been some social media comments which have already excited comment. Temperance and moderation in all things will probably lead to a healthier future for everyone. In terms of your question, Councillor Towns, there is a provision within the Income Tax Act which allows for a payment made on account of injury or disability to be made by an employer in certain circumstances. I think the medical evidence which is available would support that payment being made in this case. I'm not going to go into the reasons for that because I think that strays into that area of sensitive personal data which we discussed earlier. I think that's really all I can say on that topic. It does include psychiatric injury as well as physical injury.
Councillor Castle has indicated he'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, one question. Supposing the Council does agree the recommendation to draw a line under the whole business, does that preclude any individual member, as an individual member, taking civil action of their own? Thank you.
Any other questions? Any last ones? Have you got a question, Councillor Wearmouth?
Yes, thank you. I just tagged on to that. A firm understanding would probably be helpful for the Chamber regarding any criminal conduct and how that factors into the agreement. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll just check. No more. Councillor Dale, you've got a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to, Mr. Greenberg's discussion about the length of time over tribunals. And I just think it would be very clear if you could give a timescale, because I think it's very important to understand, people understand about not only the cost of tribunals, but the time of tribunal, because I think that would be clear for everybody to go through that again, please, because it is an important issue as far as value for money is concerned.
Okay, Mark.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Castle, is it? The agreement, so there's a provision called privity of contract. In other words, a contract only binds the parties who are signatories to it. So no, it wouldn't preclude an individual member taking any action that they wished to. But that wouldn't be on behalf of the County Council, that would be on their own account, and obviously they would be liable for, if they had a cause of action, they'd be liable for the costs and risks attached to that. Councillor Wearmouth, you're not the limited powers of the County Council to prosecute criminal matters are restricted to trading standards and such like. I'm not aware of any conduct which would give rise to a criminal prosecution, but I'm not a criminal lawyer. So criminal matters wouldn't be contained within an employment agreement, and there'd be no settlement of those, and I don't think it would be possible to oust the jurisdiction of the Crown Prosecution Service or any other prosecuting authority were they to think that there were matters which could properly be taken forward. And Councillor Dale, you asked a question about employment tribunal and litigation timescales. Well, if you've got a piece of string, I'll ask you how long it is. Tribunals are not speedy jurisdictions. There's no summary justice in the employment tribunal, and they have a significant backlog due to COVID and a number of cases arising from COVID, actually. This case is currently listed for the middle of 2023, or the window is in the second quarter of 2023, and it's listed for 5 weeks. if there were subsequent claims brought associated with it, so if you pursued one of the other courses of conduct which I highlighted, you could see that time estimate extended and actually the hearing date pushed further. And in terms of restitution or any action in the civil courts are a little bit more, they limit the time of the parties have before them a bit more, but again it's at least 12 months to get there and will probably be at least a week in court. So you'd have an extended period of litigation stretching well into 2023.
Okay, I'll just check. We are being filmed here, aren't we? We are. That's fine. It's just because I normally see the screen up there. It's just thrown me. That's a little bit. I'll just check who was. Okay, that's questions. So next thing I will do is I will move to the debates. And again, I'm going to go to those members who were at York last Tuesday. So Liz, is there anything Councillor Simpson, anything you'd like to say in the debate at this stage? I can bring you back later if necessary.
Not at this present time, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dale?
Not at this present time.
Okay. Councillor Hunter?
Not at the present time, Chair.
Okay, fine. Right, I shall then invite people to debate. Remember, you only have 6 minutes if you wish to debate anything, and you've got one bite of the cherry. So, and also please remember to stand in the chamber. Would anyone like to kick off the debate here? Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of the conflict that's been going on for various reasons, or give an opinion, actually, on the conflict that's been going on, because in the spirit of moving forward, I'm just going to talk about the conflict itself, though, and the nature of it, and why I am going to vote the way I'm going to do, which I'll make clear. We've had this conflict for 2 years in the council, okay? This spat between the chief executive and members of the administration, which has drawn in more and more people. It's become more bitter and divisive. It's caused former friends to become enemies and almost vice versa. Its positions have become entrenched, and it always, when you see a conflict like this, it always just reminds you of how important it is to what I call nip things in the bud early. So on a day-to-day scenario that we might get neighbours who are having a dispute. You know, you might have a neighbour that's having an argument over a hedge, and I always say, talk, resolve this quickly, get Benicia involved, get the council involved, I'll help, whatever. But you see it happens with neighbours, you know, they argue about hedge, then it gets more bitter and they get angry and they take a pickaxe to the windscreen and worse. It just gets escalated, things get worse and worse, and it becomes harder and harder to resolve. And from the context, or much bigger context, but say a context of a country, the bitterness and the division can be inherited generations, and you get some conflicts which people almost say, it's got so bitter, it's got so complex, it's got so entrenched, it's actually, I always would say, it's impossible to resolve. Now, this has happened with the conflict here, and it's gone on so long, and it's like the snowball effect, and it's going to be harder to resolve. And I'm afraid, and I appreciate all the work that's been done, and there's been lots of skill and some logic and some financial about how much it will cost taxpayers and the cost of going to court and so on. But this, in my mind, will not resolve the issues, I'm afraid. I hate to say it, I wish I was wrong, and if I'm proven wrong, I will say I was wrong, and that's great. But I just think the issues are so entrenched, and there's a big difference between drawing a line in the sand and sweeping things under the carpet. And I think for both sides, and I'm going to call it both sides of this bitter divide will think that they've been denied justice on both sides. And I do think that part of the agreement is quite unethical and involves things that shouldn't be swept under the carpet. So for me, with the nature of the conflict, This isn't going to draw a line in the sand. And you mentioned, and I've always said, and I don't like gagging orders. I'm pleased there isn't a gagging order. But if you think people are going to be, I'm not going to criticise the Chief Executive, I'm not going to criticise the administration, I'm not going to point out the huge errors done in September 2020, the botched suspension of the Chief Executive that's caused so many of the problems. It could have been dealt with then in a more swift way, a more quick way of nipping things in the bud, and could have dealt with that properly. So for all these reasons, I can't support this agreement, and I do appreciate that people went to York and worked hard and all the legal advice and so on, but it's, for me, it's the nature of the conflict, and we need to move on, but not doing it in this way.
We've got Councillor Sesford, then Councillor Towns.
Thank you very much, Chair. I understand best value. I understand about the speed things are taken, and I understand about moving on. Because, you know, 2.5 years ago, we were in a position where things were moving on, and all of a sudden it's come to an abrupt halt, and it's made life quite difficult for the last 2.5 years. But what we're voting on today, what we will vote on, is basically to give a payoff to someone who is alleged to have taken part in unlawful activities. And I wonder what the residents would think of that. I wonder what would happen if the residents themselves partook in unlawful activities. I wonder what would happen to them. Sacked. Locked up, maybe in some cases, depending on what they've done, of course. Let's recall, all those have spoke so highly of our CAO over the last 2.5 years and was so quick to accuse others in the public eye, whatever reason that was, public promotion or whatever. And I'll just quote one little classic speech when our former leader was removed. There's about 6 bullet points I want to say here. Peter has given many years of devoted service which should be reflected. I'm happy with what's happening in Hexham. The last 3.5 years have been fine. I haven't a clue what's going on. I've been reading the newspapers to see what's going on. Well, I mean, you know, that's going to give you an unbiased opinion, isn't it? Might as well read Murky for that, and wanted to do that. And what was their conclusion? So you've got to go, Peter. Well, so much for the method of innocent until proven guilty, which of course appears to be the other way around for the CAO and some of their acquaintances, associates. Now, I fully understand that any opportunity to attack the opposition is part and parcel of politics. We're used to that. We say one thing, they say the complete other thing. And I also understand that some people hadn't a clue what was going on. Whether they read the notes, maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but they hadn't a clue what was going on, so they followed the whip. And I understand that as well. But now, people do know what's happened. They've seen the Colour report. They've been in these things, so that they can't say they don't know what's happened anymore. So if people decide to vote for this, for a payoff for someone accused of unlawful activities, then at least they should have the decency to turn around to the residents and tell them what they've done, and not hide behind this facade of secrecy. You know, I've heard Mr. Greenberg say £1.1 million was turned down, £625,000 was turned down. The offer is £209,000 now. What makes you think somebody's accepting an offer of £209,000 when they've turned down £1.1 million? Well, maybe we all know why they've done that. And I'll let you work that out for yourselves. I'm going to call for a name vote for this, and I hope you'll allow me to do that, because that way you can individually face your residents and tell them that you voted for somebody getting a payoff when they've been alleged to take part in unlawful activities. Remember what Max Colour did, and I'm pleased we've done this in public, because Max Colour had his report in public. He didn't do it in secrecy either.
Councillor Towns.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Towns, I just have a point of order has been indicated to me.
Chair, just through you, Councillor Sesford, I think the Chamber should know that the Chief Executive hasn't been accused of unlawful activities. So I just want to make sure that the Chamber knows that. You know, at the beginning, when we talked about this, I did say that I will give guidance to the Chair where I think we are straying. So please be mindful and respectful of that. Thank you.
Councillor Towns.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that clarification, Suki. First off, I'd like to say thank you to Glenn and the team of other councillors and the senior officers who went to York, and I think who had, you know, a hell of a day, frankly. I'm chair of the Employment Appeals Committee, and I didn't know until around about 10:15 the night before whether or not my meeting last week was going to be postponed, adjourned, or going ahead as planned. And so I'm grateful for everyone kind of keeping me up to date with that, and I'm grateful for the effort and the work that's gone in. For me, this is a bit of a head and a heart decision. As most of you know, my day job is a lawyer. I'm not an employment lawyer. I'm not a public sector lawyer either. I do agricultural property, so absolutely nothing to do with any of this. But I've been in situations where I've advised clients as a lawyer, and I've said to them, you've got a strong case, but you're putting a decision in the hands of someone else. It could cost you a lot of money. It's better to keep control of matters by agreeing a settlement and walking away and bringing a resolution to things. If I was advising this council, as Mark and Suki and others have been, that's exactly what I would say. I would share the advice that you were giving. And I think you've set that out, Mark, in a very clear way. But as I said, in this case, I'm not the lawyer, I'm the client. We are all the client. The taxpayers of this county are the client. And my heart tells me that actually supporting this is not something I want to do, I have to say. But for similar reasons have been set out. There are other processes, Mark's highlighted what they are, and without wanting to stray into another point of order here, there are clear lines of inquiry that perhaps are worth pursuing. And one thing I picked up on, Mark, you said when you gave us your excellent presentation was there is a public interest in pursuing misconduct, and it might be said to be contrary to the public interest to reward misconduct or to reward failure. And I think in the Calla report we've seen a clear conclusion of certain actions, shall we say. One of the allegations that you mentioned, Suki, that's been put to the Chief Executive through the EAC relates to, I think it was on page 1 or page 2 of the Calla report, about obfuscation of his, of launching that report in the first place and of his investigations. And I agree with Councillor Sesford to a very large extent. A lot of the heads of terms of these monies are absolutely fine with me. When someone comes to this position, you expect them to get what they can contractually, statutorily entitled to. Pay in lieu of notice, pay in lieu of untaken annual leave, fine. I don't have too much of an issue with the payment towards costs, because that's quite often a compromise that's made in settlement agreements or other types of compromise. But I do unfortunately have a significant issue with paying $75,000 for injury to feelings, which I think is the capped amount. That's the highest amount we would have to pay even if we lost at tribunal. So we're agreeing to pay the maximum amount for injury to feelings, and I've not had that itemised to me what these injuries are. A payment in the sum of $40,000 on account of injury or disability. Mark, I totally understand why you weren't able to answer my question, but I asked it knowing I was going to stand up and say, I don't know what that really relates to. You mentioned psychiatric injury potentially as well, so we can maybe draw our own conclusions rightly or wrongly. But that's 115,000. There's potentially another 50,000, depending on whether or not the Chief Executive is able to retire on the grounds of ill health. But we've then heard she's not going to go anywhere of her own volition. So either she's too ill to work, or she's not ill enough to retire. It seems quite contradictory to me. So because of this element, this potential, well, minimum of 115,000 part of this is taxpayers' money, and we all know in this room, and I don't want anyone's going on about political points on this. We are in a cost of living crisis. We've just put up council tax again. A lot of the taxpayers of this county will be sitting wondering how they're going to keep the lights on this winter. And we're talking about giving £115,000 of money for injury to feelings and some other undefined injury to someone where there are other routes that we could pursue, where I think we all know there have been, there are questions to answer, shall I say. So my head says, yes, let's do this, because that's the exact advice I would be giving if I was sat up there too. But my heart says that I just think morally this is excessive, and morally this is wrong, so it's not something I will be supporting today. Thank you.
Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for a very comprehensive report, Mark. It was very interesting to hear. Well, I'm saying interesting, it wasn't. As was said before, there's two ways to look at this. Vote with your heart or your head. I was going to vote with my heart, but financially, the way figures stack up, you've got to vote with your head and go with the proposal. It hurts to say that. I agree with Councillor Sesford, a lot in what Councillor Sesford actually said. But I'm sorry, you've got to vote with your head.
Councillor Dodd, then Councillor Hunter. Sorry, that was me.
Yeah, this problem has been running around this council for a long time. 2.5 or 2 years. Some of us have been ringside throughout. Some of us have sort of moved away from it because we didn't like what we saw. So we're here. And in farming and lots of business things, you hear things, the best loss is your first loss. We've been told by the barrister, solicitor, I'm not sure which one it was, Mark, that the next two numbers will be an awful lot higher if we don't agree to this settlement. So we as councillors have a very clear steer that this number in front of us is probably the smallest number we're going to see. If we take the position of one or two people, the number will grow. And if we take it even further, it'll grow and grow and grow the wrong way for the taxpayers of this county. Now, I would imagine that, we've got Taxpayers Alliance sent us all a letter. We've got interest from other places. I think if somebody really did want to dig, they would find something in here, and it wouldn't be pleasant for all of us. So I think we need to take the opportunity to get this on the road, on the way out of this place where we can actually then draw the line and move on. Because if we don't move on, we're going to have 2 or 3 years where it's going to cost everybody a lot of money. We've just come through COVID. And I said at the start of when we started to come back, a lot of councillors are new here. They knew nothing of all of this. They probably don't want to hear about it, and they're probably fed up with the back teeth of this. And we as councillors have not had the opportunity to, what I say, bond together and have what I'd call mate conversations, whether we're Liberal, Democrat, Conservative, Labour or anything else. We haven't had that opportunity with COVID. We haven't met in rooms. We've met on screens. And it's been a very difficult time. So I want to take the opportunity to say, let's move on. Thank you, Chair.
Excuse me. It's a first instance. I'm going to ask you nicely. Please don't speak again. Thank you. Right, Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably nothing that we want to do to go forward this way, but as Mark said, it's the best of the worst situation. We've got to try and move forward. We all stood for election to try and work for our residents, not to just come here and go on and on. Other options, we could be still sitting here next year at this time, cost the council more money and still no further forward. We need to, unfortunately, draw a line under the sand, move forward, get back to the day-to-day business, and take forward the Max Calla report by working better together for the residents of Northumberland.
Councillor Dale, then Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just say, first of all, thank you, Councillor Hunter, because she was actually down in York with me last week, and just to say how difficult it was. It was very long and drawn out and protracted. And I would have to say, I thank very much for the officers who were there, who gave us all the background paper. And I think that when I asked earlier on Mr Greenberg about the time and cost of tribunal, it's enormous. But it's not just enormous, it's the reputation of this council, the reputation of all the councillors involved. On top of that, we won't be able to go ahead with the Calla report. The Calla report is very clear that we need to move forward. This council is dysfunctional. That's not just one person that's made it dysfunctional. It's a lot of people. And I think we all need to remember that. So if we are going to move forward, we all have to work together and think about value for money. And I represent people and they want value for money. They know what best value is. And I can hear people saying it's the wrong way forward. I agree that people might say, oh, well, you know, there's people who've done some criminal activity. I'm not saying that about the chief exec. It could be other people. There's lots of things. However, can I just say that as far as I'm concerned, that the audit committee will be looking and investigating a lot of the activities that have happened. So, for instance, this morning we set the terms of reference for investigation into international. And that will be thorough. And there'll be other investigations going on because we need to learn all the way along. It's like somebody saying, why didn't somebody say something earlier about this or that? There's all kinds of things. However, the big concern I have is the cost to this council and moving forward. And talk about best value is a financial aspect, as our is our head of paid service, sorry, not head of paid service, our treasurer there. But also it's actually best value, delivering services, making the environment good, working together, looking as leaders for this council in the North East. I wonder what all the other councillors are thinking about us. I wonder what all the other government activities are thinking about us. And we have to draw a line. And actually, whatever people like to say, I don't like paying money out to anybody. However, I would prefer to sit down and say, we have got, and I know that we worked as hard as we could to get an agreement. We started early in the morning, we didn't finish till after 6. And this was the best agreement we could come to, taking into account all those future costs, litigation, etc., which would have been enormous. Not only that, we wouldn't have been able to act on the Calla report, move forward, get rid of this dysfunctional council, and actually do something for the people. People are going to say, and I know the taxpayers are out here, you know, outstanding amount for severance, etc. Actually, can we just say the other way? Looking at the other way, actually this is best value, and it's the only way forward we have. We've got Calla to listen to, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't like the fact that we're getting rid of standards board complaints. Anybody who, if there's any criminality in that, I hope the council do something with that. But all I can say is, please support this. I actually, when I came in, was going to abstain. But I've listened to what people have said, and I've actually worked out the value for money, what we can do with this. And we need to move forward, and move forward now. Draw a line over. Let's have a tea party. And actually, Councillor Dodd said, get together and actually draw a line after all those awful things. The other last week, I was sent something awful about me. And I just thought, I actually thought we would learn to grow up. Now, my view is move forward, agree this, however hostile it might be to some of you, but it has to be moved forward. And it's not value for money financially, it's the value for money for the rest of the residents of this council in getting services done and moving on.
Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Chair. After being in York last week, which was very long, never mind, the deal that was done was the best deal for this council, for the chief exec. This council, we need to draw a line under the past. As of today, draw a line under the past and let's all move forward. Let's all work together to make this council a better council. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else wish to address the debate? Councillor Bainan.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Sesford and Councillor Towns, many others have said a lot of what I was going to say. Logically, listening to Mark and Jan, the way forward would probably be this course of action, but morally it's wrong. I've heard it's the best way to go for the council. We've got to move forward. It's the quickest way to move forward. It's the cheapest option. But this council has been run through intimidation, fear and bullying. And one thing that hasn't been spoken about is the staff that work here. Now, many members of staff over the last few years have come to me and they've said how much they hate working here, how much they feared for the jobs. If they stood up and argued or stood their ground, they were out the door. Now, many officers, good officers, we've lost. Their reputations have been damaged. Their lives have been damaged. We have to have some sort of investigation into that. When you're looking at the cost of money, when was the price of justice and the truth? When did it ever have a price? I can't look at my residents in the face and say, I've looked at the bigger picture. I can't look at fellow councillors who still have allegations hanging over them. Yes, they'll be dropped, but that doesn't give them the chance to clear their name. And I certainly can't look at staff members who've lost their jobs, their reputations have been damaged, and they've lived through hell for the last couple of years. I certainly can't vote for this, Chair.
Does anyone else wish to address Councillor Swinburne?
Thank you, Chair. I've made a few notes, which I'm going to go through, but firstly, can I thank the Monitoring Officer for her comment with regards to the fact that this is not about wrongdoing. It's about the terms of a settlement, an agreement, which was an agreement reached between both parties. Thank you to Mr Greenberg for the time that he's took today to go through and spell out all of the different options which could be followed if we do not follow through this today. And thank you to the time spent by the committee that went down last week and spent such a long, tiresome, hot day to come up with this. When we consider the amount being discussed, this is considerably less than that of the former chief exec. We were here 5 years ago, and I didn't hear anything about this is a problem with the amount of money. I didn't hear anything about what about this going on, what happened with former Arch, we need to investigate that. And I'm hearing a lot about what about this, what about that, and it seems less to be about the financials and more about some people having their pound of flesh. Councillor Wearmouth raised an issue before and asked the question about anything that came up that happened to be illegal. We're not the people that would investigate that. It would go through the proper channels, as Mr Greenberg confirmed earlier on. So if there was any illegal activity, I'm quite confident that that would be checked and go through the proper procedure that it would be. There are statutory and contractual entitlements which must be made in any settlement. This isn't an easy process, and it's not an easy process that any of us have had for over 2 years now. It's quite interesting when you hear about bullying of staff. It's not only about bullying of staff. And when some of us have to stand here, sit here and talk to people and put on a brave face when we ourselves are being subjected to bullying, it's very difficult to hear the word bullying brought up in this chamber. To allow this matter to proceed opens the council to increasing costs which all have to be met by the public purse. If we don't nip it in the bud today, this increases. We're not just talking about legal costs. We're talking about the fact that if we don't put a stop to it now, wages will still carry on as well. This council's already spent a great deal on legal costs, and we must put an end to it now. The Calla report identified that this matter needs to be brought to a close, which this council agreed. At the moment, senior officers are spending too much time having to deal with issues relating to this matter and are not able to focus on the day job and the function of this council. From my perspective, me and my residents want to be able to get jobs and work done in my area. I want to be able to get emails answered, and it's not happening. The council needs to move on, so the public can move on from the perception of what's going on at County Hall. And for that reason, I'll be supporting this motion today.
Councillor Grimshaw.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind me not standing, Chair, but I can just echo my colleagues' sentiments here, and especially Mark, and I can see people are visibly moved today with regards to what's gone on in the past. And we can understand, you know, getting the best for our residents, etc. And I completely agree with Mark saying that our residents deserve better now, and we represent them. They want to move on, they want to get their potholes filled, and they want to get local issues sorted out. And until we resolve this, we cannot function as a council. So I will be fully supporting my colleagues here today and going with the recommendations, because we have to move forward and at the least cost to the people who we represent. And I totally understand where David and colleagues are coming for and saying, yeah, there's, you know, issues with food banks, etc., people going hungry, but that has got really not a lot to do with what we're dealing with today, unfortunately. That's, you know, that's the government's predicament that we're in, nothing to do with local issues. So therefore, I'll be agreeing with my colleagues, and I put my implicit trust in those who went down to York to do the negotiations. And I would just like to echo some of the sentiments to say thank you very much to all that was there, members, officers who negotiated, and Mark, who's done a wonderful job explaining today in more detail. So, and that's what I would like to say, Chair. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Grimshaw, and thank you for battling on during that. I'm going to once again ask for members of the public, Gary, not to interrupt proceedings. Councillor Horncastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, obviously this is a very difficult day for everybody here, but I get the feeling of the Chamber that the majority of the people here are in favour of this going ahead. But just like to sort of like comment on a few of the other negative comments that's been made. Councillor Sesford, you made some rather strange comments trying to compare Councillor Jackson, the leader of the council, with the chief executive and how he was removed. Councillor Jackson was put in his position by the people in this chamber, and he was removed by the people in this chamber. The chief executive had a contract of employment. That's the difference. And then these people take the higher moral ground. Oh, we can't vote for this. You can't vote for it, so we've got a monitoring officer, a 151 officer, two rather expensive lawyers here. Oh, you're not a lawyer? Right, one very expensive lawyer here.
Great value, though.
Who, when we were outside getting some fresh air, I didn't realise he had a great deal of experience in local authorities. He was a leader of the council himself, I believe. Right. So when these people come along and tell you that you haven't got an alternative, really, so these people here who are going to take the higher moral ground, have you come up with an option? No. You've just taken the higher moral ground. I'm not going to vote for this. And yet you're elected by the people of Northumberland on behalf of the people of Northumberland to do the very best on their behalf. But you just decide not to do anything. I'm not voting for it. Well, fine. Let's hear your option and I might support you.
Anyone who hasn't spoken who wishes to address the chamber? Councillor Esel-Shelvin.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm one of the new councillors who have been very fortunate enough not to be here when the problem started. Now I'm listening to more councillors who have been here. I get the impression they mourn, perhaps rightly so, the lack of justice. This deal doesn't seem to dispense justice. And then some Councillor Hill, I think she mentioned about ethics, lack of ethics. So that brings us to a question. Who are we? We are not a court of law. We are elected members. We are here to dispense the public money in the most effective way. That's all it is. Given that the problem has started somehow and has been festering for so long, what we are here to, what we have been asked to do here is that whether this deal represents the best value for money. That is the question. As Mr. Greenberg said, every other alternative costs us more in terms of money, and in terms of effort, and also in terms of time. Therefore, I think if you look at the deal in terms of 3 E's, efficiency, economy, and effectiveness, I think this deal scores 10 out of 10 in every 3 categories. So therefore, I am extremely pleased to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the chamber in this debate? Councillor Towns, unfortunately, you've already spoken once. This is a point of order or a point of explanation. I'm just going to pass to Councillor Wearmouth to sum up then.
Thank you, Chair, and bear with me because I'm going to try and sum up a situation which is quite complicated, and it may just take me a little while. There's a few pages of it. So you've heard from Mr. Greenborough on the options that are available to us, and you will have weighed up in a lively discussion, I think it's fair to say, the way that you will vote. The leader has been clear for avoidance of doubt within the Conservative group that this is a whipped vote. You have the opportunity to vote however you see fit within our group, and I'm sure that extends elsewhere as well. Personally, I have to say agreeing to pass the recommendations is something that I find incredibly challenging. It is probably necessary. Challenging because we need to reflect a set of facts that don't necessarily bear much relation to each other, I'm afraid, because there's a significant moral element as well as a question of value, and that's been mentioned by a number of you. And you need probably to fall on the focus of the value, because that's the proposition that's in front of you. I don't want to get too much into personal back and forth about some of the things that were said, but there was reference to a spat. It's a bit more than a spat that we're dealing with here, I'm afraid. So the Chief, just to sort of summarise, and this is nothing that's not in the public domain, that's in CALA or the 114 notices, and I'm going to touch on these bits first. The Chief Executive's overseen the unlawful operation of a business within this council, or an entity, or something that's akin to a business, something that members were flagging with various people, including the Audit Committee, as early as, 2019, 2020. There's been quite a bit of back and forth on that. For that oversight of that business and operation, Ms Lally was paid a significant sum of money, as you've heard from Mr Greenberg, 40% roughly, I think, on top of her salary. which was also unlawful. You know, these aren't spat issues. These are quite significant things that we need to be thinking about. And the more that you get into the detail of that, the more sort of perplexed you become. Mr. Calla made it abundantly clear the extraordinary lengths that have been gone to within this council to stop processes or delay processes. And that was something that he reflected, and even in terms of his commissioning himself, in terms of the commissioning of actually getting to the bottom of some of this stuff, which a lot of people refused to believe that there was anything wrong or anything to be reflected on. You've heard in the Calla report about how the leader of the council was stymied to the extent that Mrs. Lally offered to refer him to occupational health rather than dealing with the issues that he was raising, and that is completely unacceptable. I crossed out a bit of that page. You'd be relieved. There are issues that many of you as councillors have been aware of, and they've gone on for a long time, and they are potentially worthy of the merit of going through a disciplinary process. That isn't something that we're addressing here. That was something for EAC, and it would be something for EAC in the future. There's a host of issues that need more scrutiny as well, and raised more questions from Mr. Calla in terms of significant amounts of money that have been paid to officers who've left the organisation and so on and so forth. And I wanted just to touch on those because you may feel that they're relevant, but those things will be investigated to the necessary extent, whether it's through the audit committee, as Councillor Dale has referenced, in terms of international or payments or anything else. There's nothing in this document that stops us looking at these things.
It's a point of order. It's a point of order.
I'll happily accept it.
It's a point of order, though. You need to turn your microphone on for starters, but is it a point of order?
I just think what I was going to say is that we are not investigating anything at the moment that's unlawful, I gather, at the audit committee.
So just to be clear, what I'm referencing is things that will come before audit or things that will be investigated. There's nothing that will be swept under the carpet, which is really important in the context of what we're discussing. It's important to understand that today the recommendations bring the end to any disciplinary action. That's clear in the report, and it's been mentioned by the legal team. Again, just turning to options available to us, because that's the necessary business of today. You may be left thinking that any chief executive presented with this information would have resigned. Yeah, I need to say that. It's not going to happen. So that's not happening, whether it should or not. Okay? The disciplinary route, of course.
Excuse me, Councillor Weirmill.
Certainly.
Right. It's the third time I've asked you, and I'm going to once again ask you to leave the public gallery now. You're sitting there vaping. You're interrupting the meeting continuously. You're not supposed to be doing that. You've been told that repeatedly. So I'm going to ask, can we turn the cameras off, please?
At least it was a lot faster that we've dealt with it today. So thank you to the officers and the officers who attended as well. Right, where were we? So, No, hang on. I don't want to repeat myself, given how reluctant you were to hear it all over again. So today we can only judge the report that's in front of us, and whilst we can speculate on the outcome of any disciplinary process that there might be, there is certainty in this report, and that it is worth giving significant consideration. Ms. Lally has demonstrated one thing with absolute doubt, with absolutely no doubt. When it suits her, the capability is there to pursue every avenue and to take us down every route available. And that is borne out in what has been recommended in terms of the approach before you. Now, personally, I'm very happy to face any and all processes brought against this council head-on, because I know that we haven't made any significant errors as far as I'm concerned, but there is a significant amount of time and effort that goes into that. I have colleagues I know amongst the 67, or however many of you are here out of the 67, who feel this very personally and believe that there's an overriding moral case that no penny of taxpayer money should be paid until the disciplinary process has been explored in anticipation of what that disciplinary process might bring. And that's a perfectly legitimate position to take. The bits where, as Mr. Greenborough has described, it gets more complicated is around the time that it will take, the money that it will cost, the impact on officers of the council, the impact on the services that we deliver, and the impact on the ambitious aims that we all have, regardless of party or none, for the county. Dealing with the issues around Mrs. Lally takes huge volumes of time. We sit here this week, it's already taking a day out of all of your time. On average, believe me, in a week it takes out a day and a half of my time, easily, that of the leader the same. And that in itself is inconsequential. My time, I got elected, I chose to do this. But it's all of the added time, the executive team, the lawyers. You quickly see that we could be expending that effort on the objectives of the council. The prospect of this taking another year is very unwelcome indeed, but it's almost wholly without our control. The lost opportunity is clear. Officers and politicians should be getting on with the proper business of bringing jobs, more affordable homes, improving educational outcomes, and that the impact on that is substantial. And when we get to do that, regardless of party, we're actually really successful at it. You know, school outcomes are getting significantly better. We've got jobs coming here. We've got record investment coming to this place, and that's what we need to get on with. Financially, dealing with the issues around Mrs. Lally has already cost tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of pounds. If we don't adopt the recommendations in this report, Mr. Greenborough is telling us that that will increase significantly. And ultimately, the likelihood of the likelihood of the council being found wanting may be extremely limited. And for my part, I feel that we are in a position where we probably would not be found wanting. And it irks me dearly that nuisance, which I'll describe them as, legal wranglings from disgruntled staff members who are potentially guilty of gross misconduct or other significant issues that would require them to be potentially dismissed from this place, you know, that we're spending taxpayer money in this way, potentially, to proceed, that really irritates me hugely. And I know it irritates people like the Taxpayer Alliance. And I feel that, absolutely. It really, really is irritating. But the bit that sort of really gets to me is the officers and the ability of the officers to function and to get on with their jobs as well. And so many of them approach me desperate to just get on with the day job and get on with the job that they're employed to do. And I feel really deeply sorry for the people who've left this organisation. Councillor Bain has mentioned a few, not by name, but we can guess and realise who they are. They're those people who've come to me in tears, desperate for change, whistleblowing, yet too scared to go on the record because they know they won't get listened to, because there's not enough of us that were at various stages through the last couple of years prepared to deal with the problems that were in front of us. But, you know, we're going to have to take the political position, which is that we haven't been able to deal with that. We've got to move on. We've got to get to the next bit. So today we can move on. We can free up and create that capacity. We can put a new structure in place that will actually cost significantly less money, probably, than the one that we've got. But we can't do that whilst we've got back and forth about this particular question. And we need that reset, and we need it immediately. And if we vote this through now, we can get that structure in place, we can go through the job adverts that we need to place in order to get people firing on all cylinders in this organisation. So much as I really do hate it, and much as this is probably the worst summary that you'll ever find of anybody trying to get you to vote in favour of a report, because it has probably been the least ringing endorsement that you'll ever get. I do ask that if you're able, given the moral dimension to it, that you do support it and the work that the leader and the various other people who have been involved in this process have put in. Thank you.
Okay, right. To be clear, and I know there's been talk of a name vote, so I'll come to that in a second, but to be clear, we're voting on the recommendations on this bit of paper, 1 and 2. But point 2 is to approve the terms of the settlement as set out in the heads of terms at Appendix 1. Just that's to make us clear, that's what we're doing there. So it's been indicated that there was a requirement for a wish for a name vote. Do I have approval from the Chamber for a name vote? And if you agree with that, how many do I need of that?
17.
I need 17 apparently.
11.
11. Well, I think it's clear we've got that. That's fine.
You proposed it, who seconded it?
It was proposed by, well, it was proposed by myself. That was seconded by Councillor Sesford. Which was okay. Now we go to the named votes on the matter, and as I say, we're voting on those two as I outlined there. And I'll go over to Lindsay, and you're voting for or against that. So, Lindsay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ball.
For.
Councillor Beenan.
Against.
Councillor Bowman.
For.
Councillor Carty.
Abstain.
Councillor Castle. Councillor Sesford.
Against.
Councillor Chicken.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Dale.
For.
Councillor Darwin.
For.
Councillor Dodd.
For.
Councillor Dunbar.
For.
Councillor Dunn.
Abstain.
Councillor Eschel-Shelvin.
For.
Councillor Fairless Aitken.
Abstain.
Councillor Flux.
For.
Councillor Foster.
Abstain.
Councillor Grimshaw. Councillor Hardy.
For.
Councillor Hill.
Against.
Councillor Horncastle. Councillor Humphrey.
Against.
Councillor Hunter.
For.
Councillor Hutchinson.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Lee.
Against.
Councillor Mather.
For.
Councillor Nisbet.
For.
Councillor Perry.
For.
Councillor Patterson. Councillor Purvis.
For.
Councillor Renner Thompson.
For.
Councillor Richardson.
For.
Councillor Riddle.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor A. Scott.
For.
Councillor Seymour. Councillor Sharp.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
For.
Councillor Stewart,
4.
Councillor Swinbank,
4.
Councillor Swinburne,
4.
Councillor Taylor,
Against.
Councillor Thorne,
4.
Councillor Towns,
Against.
Councillor Waddell,
4.
Councillor Wallace,
4.
Councillor Wearmouth,
4.
Councillor Wilczek,
4.
Thank you.
Just bear with us while they count the results. Okay, can we settle down, everyone? Finish your conversations, please. It's 38 for the motion, 7 against the motion, and 4 abstentions. So the motion passed. Thank you very much. Okay, so bear with me. I'm just going to get myself back onto my agenda. Go into agenda item 3, I have to leave, which is now move to item 3 on the agenda, which is to report the Staff and Appointments Committee to consider the interim arrangements to the role of Head of Paid Service. This is in public. Yes, no area. I'd like to invite the Deputy Chair, I beg your pardon, to present the report. Councillor Wearmouth, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, the purpose of this report, having dealt with the last item, is to appoint an interim head of paid service and chief exec. Apologies. The proposal that has come from Staff Appointments Committee is that Mr. Rick O'Farrell takes up that position. There are a set of recommendations before you, which I will just run down. So the first is to receive the report. The second is subject to no substantial or well-founded objection being notified by the Leader of the Council in accordance with that part of the Constitution that Mr O'Farrell be appointed on an interim basis as Head of Paid Service and Chief Executive with immediate effect upon immediate effect until a permanent full-time appointment can be made. Sorry, the pollen getting into my contact lenses a bit. 3, in the event of any objection is received from the Leader or the Cabinet, the appointment is, question be referred back to the Committee for Urgent Consideration. That's the SAC. There haven't been any, I think, received. Is that correct, Leanne?
No, we haven't, and the Leader has confirmed it, and there are no objections.
Thank you. So, I shall hand over perhaps to Leanne to talk any more through the report, if that would be helpful. Thank you.
I will start. Okay. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm not a lawyer. I am the Interim Director of HR and OD. So as Councillor Wearmouth's gone through, we've had the previous report, which now gives an indication that we need an interim Head of Paid Service, and that is in line with our legal obligations under the Local Government and Housing Act. So that has been considered this morning by the Appointments Committee, and the resolve to make the recommendation as Councillor Wearmouth has outlined. So there are a couple of issues just to bring to your attention within that. We have not advertised externally at this point because we have Rick, who's been doing the job on an interim, an informal acting basis as Deputy Chief Exec, and the need to have a period of stability within the organisation. And one of the remits of the role will be to carry forward the exec senior management restructure and the appointments of the permanent statutory officers. So that's a really key point, and it's been drawn out into the job description, which is part of the pack of papers that you have. The officer appointment rules have been observed, and I personally have consulted with the executive team, and expressions of interest were sought. The single expression was from Rick O'Farrell, and his CV and job description are in the pack, and just to note that those are confidential, whereas the report itself isn't. The staff and appointments have agreed that he's be qualified as per his CV, and that, just to confirm, we haven't had any objections under the appointment rules from the Cabinet, so that is clear. And I think that is pretty much everything around the CV and job description. The other to note is the salary is advised as at 195,000. We have done a benchmarking discussion through the Staff and Appointments Committee this morning, and that is the salary that's been put for agreement today. And as I said, the key responsibility would be to take forward the restructure of the senior team along with the permanent appointments. So I don't think I've got anything else to say on that.
I think Councillor Wearmouth's probably looking to move the recommendation.
Yes, so happy to move the recommendation. Just in terms of the salary point, I don't know if, because I have the version of the report that I was provided in staff appointments this morning.
Yeah.
Has the revised salary figure been included? Because that might just be something that people stumble over if not.
No, because the report is as it was this morning, so it was within the covering report. We said we'd give a verbal update as to what was actually agreed via the Staff and Appointments Committee. So that was the discussion. This rate that was in there was a like for like, and the discussion has gone around benchmarking, and that salary has been agreed for recommendation is 195.
Yeah.
Thank you. So
Okay,
I'm happy to move the report, Chair.
You need to move the report with a mention on the salary.
Yeah, so happy to move the report with the correction of the salary to reflect the level that was actually benchmarked. So the previous number that you have in there, just so you understand, was the amount that was paid to the previous Chief Executive. This was benchmarked in terms of other councils in the area and has been revised to 195. And it's, of course, valid for the period of time that Mr O'Farrell is in position. Just to be clear, when there'll be another meeting of Staff Appointments Committee that will consider in due course a new job description for the various officers that the Council might wish to appoint, and that will then reflect a whole different set of arrangements in terms of salary, pay and conditions and so on. So it is literally just for the purposes of the interim arrangement that you're voting on today. Thank you.
Right, so you've moved that, Councillor Wearmouth. Have we got a seconder for that? I'll go for Councillor Stewart because I saw you. I'll also say that the time is now 25 to 5. We need to be done for 5, otherwise I've got to vote through. So I'm hoping we've got a movement that we want to be done by 5. Is that, I assume that's the mood of the chamber? Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, I'll go to questions then on that one. Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Swinburne, then I've got questions.
Thank you, Chair. And my apologies if some of these questions have been covered in the job description, but in the time that we had, I didn't get an opportunity to go through there, so I do have a few questions, so please bear with me. I think you mentioned something briefly there, and it's about this staffing structure review. So I brought this up with Mr Calla in his report, who said that that needed to be carried out, because I questioned, is that by members of the Cabinet or by the Chief Exec? So will this be, the staffing structure review be carried out by the interim Chief Exec, or will we be waiting for the substantive Chief Exec for that to be carried out? How long will the interim be in post for before we look to seek a substantive? When we look to seek a substantive, will it be openly advertised and done by a fair recruitment procedure? And there was a question or an issue outstanding for some time over, I'm going to say the former chief exec, who's still in place till the end of the month, given the last decision. Who does the interim chief exec report to as their line manager to carry out performance reviews, etc.? Could you just clarify that for me, please? Thank you.
I'll bring Councillor Carty in for your question.
Well, he's just asked the question I wanted to ask, which was an approximate time frame for a more permanent chief exec to come into place. And I also want to know, and I do hope that that job would be advertised externally. Thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions? Councillor Dale.
Can I just, going back to the Calla report about performance management, which you mentioned, and maybe we can have an update on that. Maybe not today, because it's probably something that we need to have a look at to be addressed properly.
Okay. Is there anyone other than Councillor Ball who wants to ask a question? Because if there's no one else, I'll put Councillor Ball in now. Councillor Ball, and that's the end of questions, okay?
Thank you. So I just want to check the 195,000, does that include any bonuses or enhancements? And what was the other question that I've just gone? Oh, with regards to, are we not putting ourselves into some kind of risk as well if the interim director is building the team, that once we advertise, if we do end up giving the post to somebody else, that person hasn't got their team around them as well, so that there might be, again, unsettlement, changes. I just have a little bit of concern with regards to that as well. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Wearmouth's going to answer what he can, and then we'll go to officers for bits more technical.
Thank you. So, on the timeline for a new structure, which was asked by various people, as swiftly as is practical, is the answer, and that will come through full council via staff appointments, and so you will see that and get the option to adopt it. I don't know if we'll achieve that in September. I've looked at officers who are thinking that we might do, given that we're in the third week in September for the council meeting in that month, but we would hope that we can move that quickly. In terms of reporting line, Councillor Swinburne, the arrangements are that the chief officer reports into staff and appointments, and there isn't a line manager through any other route through the leader or anybody else. It's to staff and appointments that they report. In terms of risk and how you assemble a team, Councillor Ball, ultimately you are all the people who help select these officers and appoint them through staff and appointments and through full council where it's relevant, and you identify the structure, and that's what we need to move towards to make sure that it's a member-led organisation, and we would anticipate within reason that members of staff are able to get on with each other, that officers can cooperate and behave in the proper way. Ultimately, there's always a process, as you would expect, for people who are already within the organisation to apply for those roles. There is the option that there will be external appointments. There is the option that some of those people, or all those people, or none of those people, will come through the organisation, Councillor Carty. So hopefully that provides that clarity. And in terms of paying terms and conditions on the salary and any other bonuses and so on, I will defer to HR on that. So, Leanne, over to you.
Thanks. So, yeah, the process will be external for all of the senior appointments that are currently vacant. So that will absolutely be covered by that. The appraisal process is part of the JNC model procedure for chief executives, so that will sit in that forum, and there's an agreement around what is and isn't included against the objectives that needs to be aligned to the desires of the council. In terms of bonuses, no, there is no additional bonuses in terms of, that's the basic salary. Mr O'Farrell is on council terms and conditions, so he's aligned to the offers that other normal, in inverted commas, staff are afforded. So that's what he would get. So there is no additional payments that are included in that. It is basically, that's the basic plus any normal terms and conditions that any other member of the staff in it are afforded. Hope that covers everything.
Okay, is there any question? Councillor Horncastle? Okay, right. So it's been moved and seconded, and we've had the questions. We'll now go to debate. Councillor Horncastle?
Thank you, Barry. Well, I mean, I don't know what the outcome of this will be, if this is voted through, but what I would say is that if it does go through, I hope that this is the start of starting to put everything right here. Because just have a look around. Interim, 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 interim. Somewhere else there might be some interim people, I don't know. And other councillors earlier were on about, the state of previous officers' mental health. I wonder what it's like for these officers to be in their position when they're not actually in a position. And this has gone on for so long. We really need these people to have a new start. They are working so hard and they're doing so much for this council. And as members of the Cabinet know, we are already, even though it just seemed like 5 minutes ago, already looking at next year's budget. And we have to find major savings, and we need a new streamlined executive structure. And we can't do that until this happens, and this is the start of it. So I just really hope that from today onwards, that we can actually get a start and get this council back to where it should be. Because I really feel for these people, because they're working hard, but they're in no man's land at the moment.
Councillor Mather.
Thanks, Chair. I think he's an excellent officer, the dealings that I've had with him. But I'm just sat here thinking, what are other employees of the council going to be when they're watching this meeting, when we're talking about 195,000? So when we're doing this review, we need to be looking at all of our staff. And the staff that go out day in, day out through COVID, through bad weather, whether it's emptying the bins, doing our street cleaning, we are struggling to employ staff because of that pay band that they're on. So please keep in mind, although we're looking at it, it's just, I think if I was sat on the lowest band at home, hearing 195,000, I'd be very upset. So please, we must thank those staff on the lower rates and ensure that they are looked at and reviewed for the excellent work that they do.
Okay, does anyone else want to contribute to the debate? Bearing in mind it is 16:44 at the moment. Councillor Carty.
Just one small comment, right? We're all elected here to serve the people of Northumberland. And what we have to insist that this council is a member-run council. And that has to be our ethos going forward, and that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Councillor Carty. Anyone else who wishes to contribute to the debate? Do you wish to sum up then, Councillor Weirman?
Thank you. Yes, I won't take long to sum up. Councillor Carty, that's the best comment that you could possibly make, because it's fundamental to everything here. And what's really reassuring, and Rick obviously can't be in the room to say this, is that is something that he's put at the centre of everything that he wants to do in however long he's in this post. He wants to turn this into a member-led organisation, as it should be, and always should have been. And that will be a fantastic turnaround. We will get, as quickly as is practical, a structure in place. We will make sure that we're diligent and collectively with you all in whatever way that involves to get good people within this organisation, because Northumberland should be the place that everyone wants to be, really, shouldn't it? We've got a fantastic county to be proud of, huge amounts going on in regen, brilliant things going on in schools, in the support that we give to people. There's there's so much hope, optimism that exists in the county, and anyone should be fighting to get a job here, and I very much expect that they will be, in a very friendly way, obviously. Getting disparaging looks from one side here. So, happy to move the recommendation, and it might be nice, I assume that we'll bring Rick back in subject to the conclusion, and it might be nice to just congratulate him, subject to what you decide, of course. Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and it's been seconded. All those in favour, show your hands. Okay, all those against? All those abstaining? Thanks, so I think it was almost unanimous by one. So, okay, I'll go back to my agenda. We have no other items to consider. We'll invite Rick O'Farrell back in, but I will